Modern therapeutic approaches often start from a specific premise that extreme trauma and suffering are inherently identity-authoring events. If you go through something horrific, the assumption is that the experience inevitably rewrites your reality and defines who you are. But there is a different way to look at this, one that draws a strict boundary between situational power and ultimate authority. Evil can exert immense pressure, but pressure is not the same as sovereignty. When abuse, injustice, or tragedy strikes, those forces have the raw power to warp your circumstances. They can injure the body, steal comfort, and severely distort emotional stability. But they cannot penetrate the core. They do not have the rightful authority to rewrite a human being's ultimate purpose, or what we might call their telos. An oppressor can apply devastating pressure. They simply lack the jurisdiction to confer meaning onto the person they are hurting. This brings us to the concept of the image of God. Biblically, this is not a fragile, circumstantial state of mind. It is an ontological, structural reality built directly into the creature by the Creator. Because it is a permanent part of human architecture, bearing God's image is completely independent of social dignity. It does not rely on physical safety or living free from pain. A person can be unjustly imprisoned, or violently restrained, or subjected to intense humiliation. The external situation may be monstrous, but it cannot rewrite what the person actually is. The image of God is not a privilege granted by favorable conditions. Therefore, it cannot be erased by brutal ones. If the external attack cannot define the person, the focus naturally shifts inward. We have to look at how a person responds to that pressure, treating their reaction as a structural readout of their internal system under stress. A common, somewhat sentimental idea suggests that true spiritual peace means remaining emotionally calm. But enduring extreme pressure does not mean that you never tremble, that you never cry, or never ask why. Faithful endurance looks much grittier. It might mean telling the truth while terrified. It can look like fleeing an abuser without letting hatred consume you, or suffering through an ordeal without surrendering the meaning of your life. Severe emotional distress, panic, and disorientation are completely appropriate, biologically accurate responses to terror. Distress itself is not dysfunction. The real test of resilience is not whether you experience overwhelming pain. The test is whether that pain is permitted to become the final governing authority of your reality. Humans metabolize reality through an internal architecture of authority, relationships, bodily regulation, and belonging. When weak, the wound expands into a totalizing worldview. However, tactics like torture apply a load exceeding structural capacity. When that happens, the system biologically collapses. This requires a rigid guardrail. If a person breaks, panics, or dissociates under extreme abuse, that is a biological and situational failure. It is not a moral sin. The guilt remains squarely on the oppressor. The abuser or the unjust jailer is entirely accountable for the destruction caused by deliberately overloading their victim. Being overwhelmed by evil tells us about the limits of human capacity. It is a diagnostic readout of the load applied, never an automatic verdict on the righteousness of the person carrying it. There is a false narrative that overcoming means escaping without being hurt. If that were true, anyone who has endured severe abuse would be a failure. True overcoming is fidelity through suffering. Look at the history of unjust imprisonment. The shackles restrict physical movement, taking away nearly all earthly and circumstantial agency. Yet the person can still maintain complete spiritual agency, continuing to hold on to their purpose even inside a cell. We see this most clearly in martyrdom. This is the absolute limit of evil's earthly claim, the violent destruction of the body. And yet the human soul refuses to consent to evil's lordship. Overcoming simply means that you deny evil the final authorship of your story. In that light, giving up your life while holding on to your faith is one of the clearest forms of victory. When it comes to the practical reality of recovery, the goal is not to pretend the evil you faced was small. The goal is to name the wound truthfully, while actively refusing to let it become the central axis of your identity. The path forward involves actively rebuilding. You restore proper lines of authority, practice regulating your body again, and form safe relational tethers. You strengthen the internal architecture, so pain is no longer the interpretive lord of your life. The wound is entirely real, but the wound is not Lord. An oppressor can apply pressure, but only God retains the right to define who you are.